My name is Andrew Miksys. I'm an American Lithuanian photographer. I first came to Lithuania in 1995. My father and my grandparents were born here, but they left at the end of the Second World War.
Hi there. Andrew Miksys grew up in the US and now lives with his wife and twin kids in Lithuania. At the end of World War II, as the Soviets began occupying Lithuania, his grandparents fled with his 2-year-old father. They spent 5 years in a refugee camp in Germany before being allowed to move to the US. Growing up in Seattle, Miksys' experience was far removed from the Lithuanian way of life, but he was eager to explore the country of his father's birth. After finishing his master's in fine arts, he received a Fulbright and then later a Guggenheim Fellowship, allowing him to develop a project in Lithuania. I first came across his work when I saw the pictures from his disco series. He worked on this project for 10 years, beginning in 2000. They're striking because one gets a sense that Miksys has traveled back in time. The disco venues are fairly basic, and the clothes that the young people wear seem out of step with the Western styles of that period. His pictures are deceptively straightforward. They grab one's attention because they have a raw power. There's also something unfamiliar about these scenes. The disco phenomenon was very 80s and Western, but when photographed in rural Eastern Europe, one begins to be curious about how all of these elements fit together. The spaces are spartan and makeshift. They were transformed by the communities to provide the village teenagers with places to let off steam. His portraits are filled with hope and longing, and they capture a sense of innocence, which during that period would probably have been difficult to find on the streets of Seattle. Look at this portrait of a young woman isolated in the center of the frame. The foreground is highlighted and the vertical pillar directs our attention towards her. Her shy expression and exposed midriff accentuate her vulnerability. But when we explore the image further, we notice a sea of wolves in dark leather jackets circling their prey. Miksys enjoys developing his projects intuitively. When he's drawn to a subject that interests him, he's happy to start from scratch and incrementally build the essay.
I started this kind of by accident. I was in a small town, a little village, and I saw some kids going into this building, this old kind of Soviet building, and they were carrying some cases of beer, and I was like, what is going on here? And I followed them in, and I found this kind of amazing space where they were having a disco party. And later on, I realized that a lot of small towns and villages in Lithuania had these cultural centers that worked as discos on the weekends.
He bought himself a cheap car and went on to explore villages away from the major centers. His subject matter might be described as socio-documentary, but I think he's seeing and photographing from a fine art perspective. One gets a sense that he considers his subjects worthy of attention, rather than them being merely exotic curiosities. During the making of this essay, he was building connections with people and places, possibly unconsciously preparing to make the country his home. For the next 10 years, Miksys traveled the backroads of Lithuania, photographing teenagers partying in these remote villages. He often discovered remnants from the old days, discarded Lenin paintings, old Soviet movie posters, and even gas masks.
This is the first place I photographed, this club. This is where I followed these kids in, and I found this space. And you can see the design, and it was all left over from the Soviet Union. And if you can see behind the girl, there's this star, like this red star shape. In the middle is this metal Lenin head. This is not in my book. This is just a picture that I took. It's a little weird it still exists, that it's still there, because Lithuanians, the first thing they did was tear down all the Lenin statues and all this stuff. Also, there were some fights sometimes when I was in the discos. This one was in this disco, all the light, it was very dark, and all of a sudden all the lights came on, and these two guys were in the middle of this disco fighting, and one guy like broke a beer bottle or something and cut his hand. And I went outside because I didn't want to be in the midst of all this. And but when I came back inside, there was this blood on the floor, and I photographed him.
The series of photographs is rooted in a very specific time within Lithuanian history. The youth were coming to terms with a crumbling past and an uncertain future. The country's border with Europe had been closed for 50 years during the time of the Soviet Union, and they were eager to discover what opportunities were available in the West. Lithuania joined the EU in 2004, and the youth began to leave for places like the UK. Attendances at the discos began to drop, and most of them eventually closed down. The small communities that Miksys visited had experienced extreme challenges throughout the 20th century. Multiple occupations, wars, and genocide. Then more recently, Lithuanians had to adapt to a capitalist system. The venue for the disco in one of the villages was a converted synagogue. During the Nazi occupation, the Jews were imprisoned in the structure before being marched to the old Jewish cemetery, forced to undress, and shot by the Lithuanian auxiliary troops. Miksys found that being an outsider actually worked to his advantage. He was welcomed into the venues as a special foreign guest. He believed that, in a strange way, a Lithuanian photographer might have been viewed with more suspicion. Because he didn't understand the local conventions or customs, he was given a free pass to do his own thing.
They are very tight, close-knit communities, Yeah, of course, it was a little tricky at first, but I was, a little bit nervous about going to some of these places. But the great thing was, usually there were DJs. One guy in this town, Pobrade, DJ Playboy, and I showed up at this village disco, and it was packed with people, and they had a bar, and so there's lots of stuff going on, and some fights and stuff. And he just said, you want to photograph? Great. And it's our responsibility to take care of you. And that was kind of the reception I had at all the places. One place that was kind of amazing, the guys made me sit down at a table, and there was a bottle of vodka, and I had to kind of prove myself. These are some of my favorite memories of the whole project.
He wanted his project to extend beyond the discos, and to include the mood and atmosphere of rural Lithuania.
This is like what the roads would look like, and it would take me a couple hours to drive to these places and photograph. So I photographed a lot of things like this along the way as I was going there. Yeah, I've tried to photograph around the discos, what the towns look like. This is a kind of classic Eastern European blockhouse.
After 10 years of photographing, he wasn't exactly sure how he should end the project. But at some point he just stopped photographing and began editing the work. Another of his long-term essays focuses on the Roma. The project began soon after he arrived in Lithuania, and he continued working on it for 20 years. The first Roma family that he had contact with lived in the country's capital, Vilnius, where Miksys also has his home. As he learned more about their culture, he was motivated to travel to the surrounding small towns where they lived. At first, it was difficult to gain their trust. They had always been treated as outsiders by the Lithuanian society. The Nazis wiped out almost half of the population during the war, while the Soviets restricted their ability to live their traditional way of life. Even after independence, the Lithuanian press continued to demonize them and their lifestyle. This project acquired a second level of depth when Miksys decided to revisit some of his previous subjects. Because family history is so important to the Roma, they would often create elaborate displays of pictures of their relatives inside their homes. He found that these family tributes had taken collaboration to a whole new level. In some instances, he saw that pages had been torn from his books and taped to the walls, or included with other pictures in unusual arrangements. Miksys began taking pictures of his own photographs, which had been appropriated for this purpose.
I gave people copies of my book when I published it, and the kind of amazing reaction was I went to the tablet, gave people copies of the book, because there's a photograph of them in the book. They would flip through the book, tear the picture of themselves out, and give me the rest of the book back. Okay. And then, when I went into people's houses, they had photographs from my book that the pages torn out and sometimes redecorated. It was kind of the coolest exhibition I ever had. Okay, in a museum, people like to come and look at photographs, but it's kind of amazing when people really they need those photographs and they use those photographs in such a personal way that it was really quite cool. I really like that.
Miksys' work maintains a strong personal character. For 27 years, his father had published a newspaper called Bingo Today, aimed at the Seattle bingo community. The newspaper was filled with photographs that his father had taken of bingo players and stories about the prizes that they had won. It was a family business, so his mother wrote the horoscopes. As a teenager, Miksys delivered the paper to bingo halls and convenience stores like 7-Eleven all over the city. During a return trip to Seattle to celebrate Christmas with his parents, he revisited some of the old bingo halls that he knew. The managers and some of the regulars remembered him from his delivery days, and he decided to begin photographing. Over the next 7 years, he included bingo halls from throughout the United States. His portraits capture much more than just characters with their marking pens, hoping to win a game. The men and women who attend these bingo events are often escaping loneliness, and the venues provide them with an opportunity to become part of a community. I'll run some more of these images, but I hope you enjoyed that work, and I'll see you next time.
I think it's very important to find a project that really interests you, it's really something deep in there that you want to look at, and sometimes it takes a long time to figure it out. I think if you're really interested in something and interested in people, and you're not there to exploit them or manipulate them, then I think there is some kind of thing that people can sense that's not verbal.